Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn session this afternoon from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. This one's called Tales from an Offsite Project Manager. I'm Dave Emery. I'm from the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and I'm delighted to be working again with colleague Ken Farnon from Cooley Construction Services, a man with vast experience in construction and specifically offsite and modern methods of construction. And Ken will be regaling us with some tales of his experiences in this sector as a project manager. I want it to be a warts and all, and I know Ken will talk about some of his successes, but also some of the potential problems that you as an offsite project manager might have to meet. But first, if I may, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background to what's brought us here. This type of event is one of the outputs from a project that the CITB funded in 2019, which was called Improving Skills in Offsite Construction. And the Supply Chain Sustainability School, in conjunction with the MTC and the NOCN group, were tasked with preparing some learning materials that would help what is our traditional construction industry transition towards an offsite and modern method of construction approach. And to that end, we developed suites of learning materials aimed at different participants in the industry. So we have, although we have some fundamental training in terms of offsite, we also have specific training aimed at designers, at cost consultants, at procurement, logistics, site managers, and as today, at project managers. Whenever we develop materials in the Supply Chain Sustainability School, we take a similar approach, which is we reach out to the experts in the industry to say, what is it that our industry needs to understand? We then go away and create some learning materials, but we always refer back to our major partners so that they can quality check and sense check our materials and steer us in the right direction. And inevitably, they help us pilot the work as well. And there are some of the major players who have helped us in terms of the logistics section in particular. So a quick introduction, I'm Dave Emery. I've worked with the school for about 7 years now. My background is architectural technologist. Most of my work has been in the residential sector, although I've probably worked on 60 or 70 modular offsite projects as well. Had a relationship with the school for about 7 years. And I am one of its now newest employees, so I'm delighted to be a full-time member of the team. But you're not here to hear me, we're actually here to listen to Ken Farnon, who's a director of Cooley Construction Services. Ken, I've got your LinkedIn profile in front of me, but I think rather than do that, I'll hand over to you. Please introduce yourself, and I think if I stop sharing, you've got a few slides you want to show. So I am imagining our audience in the background. As I say the words Ken Farnon, they will be breaking into spontaneous yet generous applause as we do this handover. So let me stop the share.
The noise at the moment is deafening from the applause. So
that's why we have the microphones off.
Let me get this up and I'll just, hopefully this will work. So I've just a few slides to go through, but just Cooley Construction Services. So I've been in the industry, I'm probably giving away my age now, just over 20 years. And in that time, I've worked for subcontractors, so tier 2 subcontractors, tier 1 main contractors, and more recently with developers. A lot of my time was spent in the residential sector, so high-rise residential sector, but also heavily involved in reinforced concrete. I suppose over the last 5 to 7 years, I've switched focus to modern methods of construction and offsite solutions. And it's something that the industry has been changing, and there's a number of reasons why I in the business have switched to that, but most importantly, it's because of the quality that we can get from a factory environment, the cost certainty that we can get from a factory environment, and it's something that our clients are looking for now, and the government is changing with legislation towards more offsite solutions. Have I seen a big change in the last 5 to 7 years? Yes. I think modern methods of construction offsite probably make up between 10 and 15% of the industry now. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, that'll increase to anything between 45 and 55% of the industry. So the question is, tales from an offsite project manager. So a couple of things that we need to ask ourselves. What sort of project manager do we see ourselves? Are we a client-side project manager, which is very much different from any other project manager involved in the scheme? Client-side PM should be appointed at the start of the project. And when I say at the start, I would say just after what we call REBA Stage 2 and at the commencement of REBA Stage 3. It's very important because at that part of the process is where we get fully engaged with the designers. We do a procurement strategy, and that procurement strategy should be led by the project manager. That procurement strategy will inform how we deliver the project and how we buy that project, and ultimately how we design the project. So I think it's very important early on that that's something that's developed. In line with that, the procurement strategy should look at MMC and offsite solutions from the onset. If we don't do something like that and we leave it till the completion of Stage 3 or Stage 4, we do what's called back engineering, trying to back fit an offsite solution into a traditional build. And 9 times out of 10, that costs much more money in the longer term, and it will have an impact on the design, and it can have an impact on your program and schedule. Now, as we're seeing more offsite delivery, we also need to look at how we fund projects. So again, client-side project manager needs to be looking at that from the onset. Traditionally, we would fund throughout the overall duration of the project, and the main focus would be at the construction stage. But because we're shifting towards an offsite and factory environment, there will be a different cash flow forecast. Your cash will get focused towards the commencement of the project, where you have to put deposits before we start any of our construction. So that's something that needs to be borne in mind in the future, and it's something that needs to be discussed with our funders on how we best do that going forward. The other thing we need to understand is for the project manager, what is the best form of contract for an offsite solution? Our traditional contracts at the moment don't really lend themselves to that. So the likes of the JCT suite of contracts, or design and build contracts, or even when you go to the likes of NEC or FIDIC. So we need to start looking as an industry on how we procure and contract on offsite construction techniques. We need to early engage. So the client side project manager is very much responsible for that early engagement of the specialists. And I think it's critically important that we do engage those specialists very early on in the process. We need to pay them for their advice. We need to start looking at the value that they bring as opposed to the cost, and get more into that PCSA process, where we do engage specialists for a period of time and treat them like any other member of the design team, because they are ultimately designing a product and a solution for our developments. I'm not sure why we don't pay them at the moment, but it's in a lot of projects that I've worked on, we've used as much free gratis as we can, and I don't think it's the best way forward. You're not getting the best advice. Sometimes we're in competition, and the commercial constraints are too great. So you need to definitely reward them for what they're doing, just like the architect, the engineer, and the MEPH. You know, at that start of the process, we need to make some key decisions. You know, some of the key decisions are, as we said, our delivery method. Are we going to go with a traditional method of construction? Are we going to go with an MMC? Or 9 times out of 10, it's a combination of both, where we use offsite components within a traditional build, which still can be used. The likes of precast elements lend itself well with in situ elements. We look at unitized cladding on an in situ frame. We look at components within the MEP that are modularized offsite and then brought onto a traditional site. So there's many different ways we can mix it up, which all work very effectively and work really well. Other project managers are the next big project manager is the subcontract project manager, or the on-site project manager as referred to. So they're principally responsible for the actual delivery of the project on site, the muck and bullet, shall we say, of the day-to-day execution of the works. More and more, what we're tending to see, or what I've seen in the past, is that the client is looking at the subcontract and tier 2 subcontract project managers to take more responsibility in an off-site solution, where they will do the substructure and the superstructure that will support perhaps volumetric units, and they will do a clean merge between the factory-based project management and the on-site project management. I think if you combine them all, that's the sort of project manager of the future, someone who steps across all disciplines, particularly understanding the factory process and the merge between the factory process and the on-site installation process. So it could be that we're all going to become a number of all of the above, so where we need to understand the design process, the client-side project management, the on-site installation, and also, more importantly, the factory-based project management. I think as an industry, we'll soon find a name for that. I haven't as yet, but I'm sure we'll come up with some. Hopefully today somebody ask me some questions later on, we should have a name for that.
I sense you're about to change that slide, Ken. Before you do, where do you see yourself? Do you actually straddle all 3 of those functions, or do you yourself have a particular speciality?
I think our speciality it's a combination of all 3, but we sit alongside advising the client the clients we advise are looking at self-delivery themselves. So more often than not, it's on projects £100 million plus, where they set up their own construction management company to actually deliver the project on their own behalf. I think it's very much the same model as Berkeley Homes. Berkeley Homes would deliver all their projects themselves. We're now seeing a lot more residential developers doing that. That's for a number of reasons. They can control the budget, they control the schedule, they have much more ownership over the prelims and the procurement strategy. But where we really add value is early on in the process, at the commencement of stage 3, we start bringing the manufacturers in. So that could be the manufacturers of the unitized cladding, lift manufacturers. These are all the experts in the industry that don't get brought in until around stage 4, more often than not around stage 5, when I think it's too late. And their advice comes much later in the process. You know, if we look at an element, at the moment, over the last 5 years, resi developers have been building their lift shafts to accommodate the biggest lift you could get, so they could go out and price 5 different lift subcontractors. But then what the realization is that the shaft is too big for the lift, and that is dead space. So that's every square foot that's given over to the lift core is about £1,000 in revenue. So why not get the lift manufacturing very early on, design your core around the lift that you're going to use, and don't have any of that wastage. Similar process with we done an exercise with BG, and particularly on partition walls and the main partition walls between dwellings. People were using many different types of boards, so that a soundproof, that a fireboard. We worked along the lines to use the one board, the high performing board for all areas, and it didn't cost any more than it would have normally, and we knew we had that certainty that we met the performance criteria. And we also seen that as a selling point. Why would you just meet the base level of the recommendations? Why not improving them and better them and sell that? So they're things that we tend to bring to clients. So getting the manufacturers, getting the people actually build these things and produce these things in very early on in negotiations to bring real value. So it's all about value.
I agree with you. And the other obvious question from my point of view is, like you, I believe that early engagement with all the professionals on a project will reap rewards. Do you find it easy to get in to influence a client as early as you would like, or are you brought in a little bit too late to be able to advise them fully?
You're probably brought in after stage 2, and the planning on a development's already been granted at that point. Has the design been developed enough? Probably not. We've seen what we've been brought in after at the end of stage 3, and the design it's gone through that whole REBA 3 process. It is getting too late at that point, because then we start back engineering, and then we start looking at what I found is on a lot of the schemes we worked, there's no project brief. So the client hasn't done a project brief, so everybody's working to what they interpret a brief. And now a brief doesn't need to be a set of employers' requirements. A brief can be as short as 2 pages. And it's surprising how often there isn't one developed on a job, on a project. So getting that brief developed early on, and people just referring back to that, or disciplines referring back to it. You know, what does the client want out of this scheme? Are they going to retain the scheme? Are they going to sell the scheme on? Is it a PRS scheme? Is it build to rent? Is it we'll retain the asset? And then you start looking at things where it's capital costs versus whole life cycle costs, and that's when you start bringing the real value. You know, we started looking at lease lifts over a period of time.
Yeah, I think that's my point, isn't it? That you, if you were engaged early enough, can probably bring far more in terms of capital savings than it would cost to have you there at the outset. And that's, I think, what that would be the message to the client, I hope.
Yeah, well, we say a lot of the time, if we don't save the value of our fee, we'll renegotiate our fee to give a portion back. So we're that confident that you can make real savings and real value savings early on, but you need to be there very early on in the project. And we act as that conduit for the whole collaboration piece as well, which is really important. So yeah, I'm seeing more often than not that clients are now engaging consultancies like ours at an earlier stage, which is beneficial for the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to hear.
So just on project management, again, as I said, we've got a lot of different roles within project management. There's a lot of definitions of what a project manager is. I tried to define 3 or 4 roles, but sometimes with different perceptions of project manager, and that's very much depending on how you see yourself as a project manager and where you sit within the built environment. So you can take like what we do, and I think it's very important, we take a very much holistic approach where we span ourselves across all of the disciplines, and that will be design, construction, planning if it's required, funding. We've got to be very flexible and versatile. But nowadays it's spanning ourselves across that factory environment and that offsite environment, which is very much new to a lot of people. It's new to us, and it's understanding how that process in the factory, the logistics, the procurement of raw materials, feeds back into schedules, feeds back into the cost analysis, and you know, I think that's something that, as the supply chain school develops these interactive modules, it'll be more, that'll become much more prevalent, is understanding that process. Again, you could take a purely design approach to the project management, where you're engaged or marrying up all the various design discipline. You know, on a typical project, you could have anything up to 20 designers, from your primary 4 designers to all of your secondary consultants, fire, acoustics, lift, transportation, vertical, cleaning strategies. So there's many secondary disciplines that need to be brought into that whole design approach, particularly when we're looking at offsite.
Actually, if I can throw a comment in here, Ken. We developed, as I said, 6 streams of learning for different professions in offsite. And in the old days before COVID, when I was presenting these in a sort of classroom environment, what I thought was really significant was that architects and quantity surveyors and project managers in particular not only attended the course that was aimed at them, but they were more inclined to attend all the other courses in terms of site management and logistics and costings. And I did feel very much that the professions who were most likely to have early access to the clients were trying to educate themselves on the wider issues around offsite in order to be able to advise the client properly. And I took great heart from that.
Yeah, no, it's really important. I think that all the design disciplines begin to understand what is offsite, and it's not just, you know, it's not just that volumetric build. It's MEP cupboards. It could be just modular units or components that will go into a traditional build. You know, we've got to start somewhere. I think eventually it'll end up as very much everything will be volumetric, but there is a journey, and I think we're past the start of that journey, because I think offsite goes back to the 60s when you start looking at precast and precast housing and the modular housing that happened then. Terrible reputation. Things have changed now. Much better. But even timber frame houses, one-off timber frame houses, that is an offsite solution. That is modular construction. You know, I think as professionals, construction professionals, we find it difficult to understand that whole manufacturing process. We're very much elemental driven, and we put our foundations in, then we start, stop, and the concurrency is difficult to understand. But I think as we start to see more offsite coming in and getting more involved, we then start seeing the benefits of that concurrency. Yeah. Again, if we look at ourselves as project managers, it's where our responsibilities and controls are. Where does it stop? I think historically people had very much red lines drawn. That's what we do. We don't go past those red lines. The construction element's not ours. That we hand that over to the tier 1 contractor or tier 2 subcontractors. Similarly, again with the manufacturing, well, that's the responsibility of the tier 1 contractor, because they've engaged the manufacturer. I think that there is no red lines anymore. I think the responsibility goes from the commencement of the project to the completion of the project and beyond. So that's a sea change, something that we've got to learn as construction professionals. That goes hand in hand with the ownership and accountability for the decisions we make, and for the advice that we give the client. I think it's really important, that advice that we give the client, that they can see that we can demonstrate the value early on, and it's got to be measurable.
Oh, it's interesting you use the word value there. What do you define that in financial terms or in other ways as well?
I think a lot of it does come down to financial terms, but it can come down to repeat business, the quality of product you're doing. It can come down to marketing, when people see the value of your project and product. I think a lot more clients are retaining the buildings, particularly, and my background is predominantly in the residential sector, where we've seen people, just developers, go from just selling off the flats to retaining the flats and operating a private rental sector or build to rent. So then that's when value comes into it. Do I spend a little bit more capital expenditure, but my planned and reactive maintenance is a lot less over the lifetime of the building? So I think that's something that's really important. So clients can measure that value. They can measure collaboration, how successful the project was delivered. Do you retain the same team to deliver your next project? And if it does go successful, why not? That's when you then start getting into the whole standardization. Use those models that you've created, even use those designs that you've created. Why reinvent the wheel? And it's the same with your manufacturing process. Manufacturers don't change their process every time they take on a new project, whereas in construction, we change the process continuously. It's a bespoke model we keep on using. But we should
not just the process, but the team and the supply chain, and we change everything, don't we, from project to project?
Yeah, we completely change that. So if you have something successful, and obviously it's very successful in a factory environment, why not utilize it? And we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
Project manager of the future, as I said earlier on, I think it's someone who is going to straddle all of those disciplines. So they'll know a lot about a lot of different elements, be it cost, be it marketing, be it that factory environment, the advice to give to the clients. But I think it's multifaceted, and I think it's only good for the industry going forward. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So looking at some examples when things go right for project management, and particularly in an offsite setting. So the one from my own personal experience is unitized cladding on high-rise construction. So I've been on a number of projects where early on in the procurement process, we very much focused on, it was cost-driven. And not to the detriment of the schedule, but purely cost-driven. And a couple of times I've done several exercises. We looked at a traditional way of constructing a envelope could involve 6-7 different components. You'll start off with your bracketry, your SFS, your sheeting board, your windows, your insulation, your fire barriers, and eventually your external skin, potentially balconies. They all come from different manufacturers. They could potentially all come from different suppliers, and more often than not, they'll be installed by perhaps 6 or 7 components might be installed by 2 or 3 different subcontractors. Mm. And in that, you buy lots of risk, you buy lots of problems, and we only have to look at what's happening in the recladding. There's £5 billion allocated to recladding. We look at Grenfell. We look at the new fire regulations, and that is all as a result of, I suppose, some of us looking at the bottom line, myself included at times. And that's what we learned from. There is an alternative. So I started looking at a unitized system. Pound per square meter a unitized system is anything between 15 and 17% more expensive. So on paper, it looks more expensive. What were the benefits? One install, one contractor, one manufacturer. So the manufacturer designed the system, fabricated the system, and installed the system. So we got, in this particular example I'm going to show you, we got them involved very early on. We done a strategy of Offsite. We made the decision at stage 3 that we were going to go from the traditional SFS solution to a unitized solution. So I felt it was like a design, it was a design-led solution. The design team we embedded the manufacturer into the design team at a very, very early stage. And they became part of our delivery team. The architect, the structural engineer, and the manufacturer of the unitized cladding. We built a really good team culture around it, and the behaviors was all about collaboration, because we brought that manufacturer into the team, their designers into the team, so it felt as a single team. What were the results we got? We got cost certainty. So our entry price was the same as our exit price, which is quite rare in projects. The program milestones that we set ourselves were met, and particularly around building water tightness. Other milestones about starting the fit out area. You know, we were up at 7 stories on the concrete frame, and we were following behind with our cladding, the installation of a cladding. Safety, we took that safety approach. So safety started in the factory. It didn't start on site. That was, I think it's too late when it starts on site. So with our own internal safety department, the manufacturers and the install team, we looked at ways of how do we make this safer? How do we transport it in a safer manner? How do we pack it in a safe manner? How do we distribute it in a safe manner? Do we install fixings in the factory that enable us to erect it in a more safer manner on site? So it, you know, again, very much involved in that design process. Quality. Sorry, David. You want...
Yeah, I was just going to say these sound absolutely clear, measurable advantages to the benefit of the whole project. You prefaced this story by saying you got them involved at an early stage. What does got them involved mean? Does that mean you made a financial commitment or contractual arrangement?
We made a financial commitment. So I think so we got the manufacturer involved in a PCSA process. So it in effect a two-stage tendering process. Yeah. Most unitized cladding will from point of order to delivery on site is about anything between 40 and 45 weeks. We estimated we had an 18-week early engagement PCSA process, got them involved in that and paid for that advice, because we could take that advice and go elsewhere if we chose to. And I think by paying them, we realized the value, and they understood that we valued them as manufacturers and their expertise that they were bringing to the team.
Great to hear.
I'm very much, I support that, David, where we do pay for people's advice. I get embedded into a team, and I want to be paid for the advice that we give.
Yeah, of course.
The same with the architect and any other member of that of the design team. So I think it's critical that the manufacturer, be it manufacturers, suppliers, whoever it may be that is given that advice, get paid for that advice.
Thank you. I'm just going to, Sophie, if I may call on you, I have a little quirk on my machine where the mouse disappears. I understand there is a question in the audience. Sophie, could you articulate that on my behalf?
Yeah, no worries. We just have one question from Tom, referring to a point you said earlier, Ken. He says, I like the don't just meet the spec, try and better it message that Ken mentioned. Would you say this mindset of just meet the spec is culturally embedded in the industry at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it is embedded in the industry all of the time. we've got building regulations, we've got a third party, whether it be previously Code for Sustainable Homes, the word BREEAM, well, and it just seems, well, as long as we just meet the lowest threshold, we've done what we said we were going to do. You know, that's not the way we should be doing things. We should always be looking to better it. The step up from just meeting the threshold and doing better financially is very little. The effort to do that in terms of even program wise, again, is very little. But the value that brings is enormous. So it is, we need to change our behaviors. And I think, it's a difficult thing to say, but I think what's happening, the change in the new building regulations, and what we've seen that's come out of the Hackett report has confirmed all of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I think we now, as professionals, have the opportunity to change that. There is a spotlight from government and from the public on the construction industry. I think we absolutely made strides over the last 5 to 10 years about being an inclusive industry, about changing the way we do things, about being more professional. And I think the Hackett report has set that back somewhat. So I think we now are the custodians of that to move that forward. So yes, I think culturally we all have a responsibility to change that. But I don't think it's difficult. I don't think we're fighting a losing battle. I think it's something that can be done easily, just our behaviours, and by doing things like, you know, early engagement, getting people involved at the start, wanting to do it right and wanting to do it better, and the team, you know, at that early process, saying how we can do it better with very little financial impact is very important, and very little schedule impact or you know, huge quality impact. So yeah, I think it's a good question. Hopefully I think hopefully we all go away to answer that by our own attitudes. And I think by being on something like this, it demonstrates that our behaviours are changing, that we do want to learn, and we'll take those learnings back into our own lives and our own professional environment.
I think you and I, before the broadcast, Ken, were talking about how our industry, in our long experience, has seemed resistant to change until relatively recently. And now that we do sense this appetite for change, I think the best way we can invoke change is to do what we're doing, which is to showcase success and hear stories like this, where perhaps a shift in mindset has actually reaped rewards.
It is, I think, you know, the Farnham report, modernise or die, I think those words say it all. And we are modernising, and we are changing, and you know, I think it's incumbent on all of us to assist with that process. I think it'll be a completely different industry, as I said at the start of this, in 10 years' time. At least between 45% and 50% of new build will be factory based, and that will bring the quality and the quality assurance, and that quality assurance process that we may have lacked sometimes on actual traditional builds. So no, it's good to see the change. Just publicity wise, I think our industry has had a bit of a kick in this past couple of years, and hopefully again, you know, it will change, and people will want to come into the industry for the right reasons. Great industry to work in, and I think as it's changing to more offsite, that's something that I get excited about, and hopefully everybody else gets excited about. So it is a complete change for us all.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So just going back to the unitised cladding and my experiences, this is just one element, you know, that I've seen that has happened on some of the projects I've been on very successfully. You know, that exemplar safety approach, because we designed safety into the system before we started actually fabricating it, resulted in no accidents on site on a building envelope, and in this particular instance 35 stories high. you know, looking at the whole life cycle costs, when we, as I said, when I looked paper at the capital cost, unitized cladding was anything up to about 17% more expensive. When I take the safety, the quality, the program, and the whole life cycle costs, worked out about 10% less than a traditional build, and that's where the real value comes in. So I've got a short little video here. I'm just gonna show you where, you know, the panels were panels were designed collaboratively on site. That design was taken away. The raw materials were procured, fabricated in a factory in Europe, packaged in stillages that we designed that were the safest method of delivering to the site to suit the site constraints. The factory was very much involved in the whole logistics of how we got the panels to site and how we stored them on site, and then again how we erected them and installed them on site. So hopefully this short little video is the culmination of all of that hard work, all of that early engagement. So hopefully this works. Oops, sorry. The one thing I hope you noticed on that was that the external of the building had no scaffolding or mast climbers, and that was a huge saving financially, but also safety wise. You'll have seen from the video there that the fire barriers were built into the panels. So the likes of the fire barriers for separation were quality checked at the factory, quality checked pre-install, and quality check post-install. So by using a system like that, you know, other benefits you've got to look at is the insurance provisions, and any warranty, that's any third-party warranty from a warranty provider, and that assurance process, so that those costs are reduced. So these are some of the hidden costs that sometimes cost consultants may not see, but bring real value. Also, when you go to sell that building, if a client goes to sell that building in 10, 15 years, if it's a fund that has provided the money for that, a pension fund that has provided the money for the building, the assurance is that the net value of that building hasn't decreased because of quality issues. So again, that's something that a value can be apportioned to. What that value is difficult to quantify, but there is a value associated with it.
And of course, with something like temporary works with scaffold, of course, your costings are based on the assumption that the project will run to programme. Of course, if there are any overruns or delays, that higher cost just keeps multiplying, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a prelim cost based on time, as he said, quite rightly said. Yeah, so it does continue. That the schedule assurance is important, because your financial model is based on that overall schedule assurance.
Yeah.
When you You know, so the difference there is on the likes of the factory, the project manager or the client side project manager would be very much involved in seeing the manufacturing process, maybe perhaps vesting the materials offsite, because there is a, you know, for manufacturers, there is a big capital outlay at the onset, and that's something that I suppose we've got to get used to as construction professionals, where we just do our interim payments on a monthly basis based on a percentage what's constructed on a building site. 80% of your cost could already be a portion because it's built in the factory. It's done, it's finished. And then the last portion is the actual install, the logistics, install and delivery, etc. So
got an interesting story about schedule assurance. So I had a client that was a modular construction company. I think I said I did 60, 70 projects with them. And it was run by two brothers. One was the MD, but one was kind of the project manager. And they considered tendering for building McDonald's restaurants. And they decided not to, because the penalty clauses for the late delivery, they thought, could bring their company down, because they weren't confident that they could deliver on time. Well, if you speak to Jim Cowell at Elliott UK, they've done more than 100 McDonald's restaurants, and it is precisely because Jim can guarantee that the project will be delivered on time that the question of penalties never even enters into them. So this absolute certainty about the timing of delivery can be achieved with the right mindset.
It can be, and what we tend to do, David, is because we've got that assurance, we switch penalties to incentives.
Yeah.
So it's on the contrary, we say, you know, we can deliver on a day, but perhaps we can deliver earlier because we have the confidence in the process and the offsite solution that we are delivering. So we then tend to get an incentivization to get that earlier, because the earlier you get it, the more it starts generating a revenue, and that's the most important thing for the client. Least forget that the client is also there to make money.
Yeah. Excellent. Are we at your last slide, Ken? I think we were.
Yes. So I was asked to, everything goes right. Unfortunately, things go wrong, and they go wrong for a reason. So I was on a particular project. Again, it was a residential project, and the client wanted to invest heavily in BIM without really understanding BIM. And it was possibly something to do with all the press and BIM level 2 and BIM level 3 that the government were insisting, and it was he's seen as the silver bullet that was going to solve all of the problems during the design process and on site. So he invested a lot of money in it, but he invested it from my point of view very, very much too late in the process. Stage 3 was complete, and stage 4 was all but complete. Didn't have, you know, so we were doing BIM execution plans very late on. Didn't have a set of EIRs for the wider team, and I was going back to that project brief that I spoke about. Don't get me wrong, BIM is an excellent tool. It's probably one of the best tools that we do have in terms of collaboration, but we've got to launch it at the right time, and we've got to have the right brief. Unfortunately, on this one, we didn't. We lacked, everybody's working in silos in terms of their own models and not bringing them together. We didn't utilize it to its full ability, or we lacked a lot of clash detection. The clash detection we were doing wasn't on the right models, and the manufacturing tier 2 contractors had very little engagement with it either. So it was just the primary consultants that were using it. What were the results? We abandoned it at stage 5. It just we couldn't even federate the model. It was a little bit of a disaster. I don't think the client, the client didn't get a return on their investment. So they had the right attitude. They'd done it for the right reasons. They'd done it at the wrong time. So they didn't get that return on their investment that they should have got. Very much to the environment, you can see there we ended up coring holes and getting them in the wrong positions. Again, that's something, you know, how do you quantify that? It has a huge impact on the schedule. It has a huge impact on safety. Just look at hand-arm vibration. Look, you know, things like wastage. We've got to get rid of that stuff that we put in. We're taking it out now, so we've got to get rid of it. So that has a cost. Has a logistics issue as well. As I said, the health and safety issue. We sort of reverted to type, as I call it. We just started then working in our own little silos, just firefighting. But if the client had a launch BIM, and I don't think he needed to invest that much money in it, at the start of stage 3, this would have been none of this. So it goes back to that whole early engagement piece is really important. And again, using that the BIM process to manage his building, to put the health and safety file on BIM. You know, all of that saves money. Put the Cooley drops, so asset register, asset tagging, and then you then sell that model with the building. It becomes a tangible asset that has a value on it. So that was something that unfortunately went wrong. I think that client has learned from the lessons. I certainly have learned from that lesson, and so did the rest of the design team. But BIM was very much in its infancy when we tried to launch that. But going forward, we've done about 80% of the projects we've been involved after that has successfully delivered in BIM, and we're now seeing that the manufacturers have embraced BIM probably more so than some of the contractors, and the integration of their models is you know, it's quite fluid, and it works very well.
Yep.
Excellent. So that concludes my slides. I'm very much open to any sort of questions or anything that anybody wants to ask us.
Thanks, Ken. If you could stop share, it might overcome my little bug where I can't actually see the mouse or do anything on my machine.
There we go.
Perhaps that was being a bit too optimistic. No, it hasn't, but never mind.
No,
really great. There've been some interesting comments. Any more questions come out of those comments, Sophie? I'm unable to see them on the right.
No worries. A couple of questions, yes. One relates back to the video, I think. With this method from Brian, with this method of installing the panels, did you avoid erecting scaffolding around the building?
He obviously submitted that about a second before Ken said, yeah, we didn't have any scaffold.
Yeah, so no scaffold, no mast climbers. And just to, it was a Brian that asked the question. The other benefit of that, if you erect scaffolding, you have to have scaffold ties throughout the building. So you can never complete your building. So you remove those scaffold ties and then you become weather tight. So again, all of those pluses. The tie for the tower crane, again, we brought the tower crane supplier in very early on so we could locate our ties through the cladding. So we designed those cladding elements around the tower crane ties. So when we removed the tower crane, it was just simply putting in some glazing. So yeah, worked really, really well.
Thanks. Another quick question from Brian, if you've got time. Have you successfully used BIM to generate asset register?
Yes, I sort of probably got on to the end. So we do the Cooley drops and the asset register. We've successfully put the health and safety file on BIM, so tagged all of the O&M information onto a BIM model. That works really well. It gets rid of that. I've been on jobs as a project manager or as project director, and I've spent the last 2 months of the project getting bits of paper from everywhere to try and build up a health and safety file. It is a requirement under CDM. You can start building that health and safety file when you do the first model, and you start bringing in the supply chain and you start uploading their information onto the model. So yeah, no, Brian, big question, and it can be done very successfully.
I've got a story about that, which goes back to I was a consultant to Carillion before they unfortunately went under. But I was working with them on a £300 million hospital project in the Midlands, which they said we're going to use BIM. This will be an exemplar BIM project, they said. And one of their aspirations was to embed handover data into the model, because they'd not only got to build the hospital, they'd got to operate it for 30 years. But they calculated on the 2 previous hospitals they built that just the time and expense in collecting, collating and delivering all the manufacturer's brochures, PDF files, all that handover information, almost the traditional carrier bag style of handover, had cost them more than £300,000 per project. So there was an immediate saving if they could make BIM work. So that was my little story. Ken, I've been delighted with your tales of being an offsite project manager. I knew it would be good. You've exceeded expectations. I haven't been able to monitor the comments in the chat, but I'm sensing that they were very attentive, very appreciative as well. So thank you, Ken. Thank you for everybody who's attended. This is one of a series of lunch and learns, so please keep your eye on the Supply Chain School website. Have a look at the forthcoming events. We've got plenty planned over the next, well, we're making plans for 2 years at the moment. There'll be lunch and learns, there'll be some longer workshop type events. And because we've talked about BIM today, I should mention that our newly launched digital section will also be generating a number of events that you may very well be interested in. So Ken Farnon from Cooley Construction, thank you very much from me and from the Supply Chain School. Great working with you again. Look forward to another opportunity to work with you in the future. And thanks for attending. And the session is closed. Thanks, Ken.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.